Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being here today, and Happy New Year to each and every one of you and to your families. I'm sorry that we have to gather here under these circumstances. I'd first, we all right? I'd like to acknowledge Evelyn Cruz, who's coming up, I believe, first, correct? All right. Evelyn, are you coming up first?
To say a few words?
Oh, are you starting off then? Okay, all right. So, first of all, I'd like to thank the extraordinary New York delegation for being here with us today. Just to, first of all, list off who is here, and then we'll do so proceedingly when each individual speaks. First of all, Chairman Jerry Nadler was unable to be here today. He's with his wife, who's going through a tough time, and our thoughts and prayers are most certainly with her and the entire Nadler family. I'd like to acknowledge Chairman Eliot Engel, Chair of the House Committee on Foreign Affairs, Congresswoman, Chairwoman Carolyn Maloney, the Chair of the House Committee on Oversight and Reform, Congressman Greg Meeks, the Chair of the Financial Subcommittee on Consumer Protection and Financial Institutions, as well as a member of the House Committee on Foreign Affairs, Congresswoman Yvette Clarke, the Vice Chair of the House Committee on Energy and Commerce, Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, the Chair of the House Democratic Caucus, and Congresswoman Grace Meng, member of the House Committee on Appropriations. And of course, thank you to the Museum of Jewish Heritage for hosting us as we address an issue that cannot be ignored. We were all horrified by the terror attack in Monsey in New York last week. And we should take a moment to acknowledge and put in our thoughts and prayers Joseph Newman, who is still fighting for his life. And we also have to acknowledge the fact that there were more anti-Semitic violent attacks since Monsey, with 2 Hasidic gentlemen being attacked within the last 24 hours. And then there's the tragic shooting in Jersey City at the Kosher Deli. And then Pittsburgh. And then Poway. Christchurch. Halle, Germany. The list goes on and on and on. Each and every person standing behind me today, just within this last week, has heard the following from their constituents in New York City. I'm afraid to go outside with my kippah on. I'm afraid to speak Hebrew in public. I'm afraid to go to the synagogue. I'm afraid to congregate with my family for Hanukkah here in New York City. Now, this is not a new reality. We have seen hate crimes skyrocket here in New York City, exponentially. And the majority of that increase has been anti-Semitic attacks throughout New York City. Places of worship have repeatedly been targets for mass shootings and terrorist attacks throughout the nation. This is a reality that we refuse to accept. Now, in this time, thoughts and prayers, though, in this time of skyrocketing violence, tweets are not enough. Action is what is required. That is why the New York City delegation in April of last year called on an increase in the nonprofit security grant, because there are far too many places of worship that are in desperate need of additional security. And we are proud to announce today that that funding increased by 50% to $90 million this year. But that's just step one, getting an increase in this funding. We are also here to announce that in the coming months, workshops will be held with partner organizations throughout New York City to make sure that the best grant applications in the entire country are filed by New York City religious-based organizations. We have got to get our fair share as New Yorkers of every faith are afraid to pray. No stone can go unturned in this effort. All levels of government, all law enforcement agencies must play their part. New York City must be a beacon for freedom, must be a beacon for religious liberty. We all have to work together to educate and eradicate hate. And we, as our constituents, as Jewish communities throughout New York, are petrified. We must work day in and day out to do everything we can. So once again, I am incredibly proud and privileged to stand here with my esteemed colleagues who have served New York for so many years. And I would like to now introduce Chairman Eliot Engel, who has again worked on this issue for so long. Chairman.
Thank you, Max, and good morning, everybody. I'm happy that my colleagues are here and we can stand together. Obviously not happy for the reason that we have to stand together. I visited Muncie. I represented Muncie for many years in the Congress, and I visited with the people of Muncie a couple of days ago. And I want to tell you that the people there are together in trying to combat the scourge of anti-Semitism. I spoke with many of the people. People are just scratching their heads and wondering what is happening in this country. This is the United States of America. We have always felt safe in this country. We have always felt that people ultimately will do the right thing in the United States of America. And yet we have seen, as the Congressman just pointed out, attack after attack after attack after attack, and it doesn't end. And we like to think somehow, sometimes in New York, that we are insulated from this kind of thing. Oh, how could there be anti-Semitism in New York that's of any consequence when there are so many Jewish families in New York? Well, the truth of the matter is, an attack on anybody is an attack on all of us. Unfortunately, you don't have to be Jewish to feel the hurt and to feel the pain and to feel the attack. People in this country have a right to worship as they see fit. We are struggling now in Washington for the Constitution of the United States. And every one of my colleagues from New York has worked very hard to make sure that the United States remains a beacon of light. But we have lots of problems here. And it's important that Congress acknowledge it, and it's important that we put our money where our mouth is. And so that's what we're announcing today. And I can tell you, and I know I can speak for every one of my colleagues here who work really, really hard at their job and really, really hard to combat the scourge of anti-Semitism, that we are not going to sit still. We are not going to sit idly by. We're not going to just allow these things to happen, but we will speak out time and time again and do more again, putting our money where our mouth is. You know, I was born in this city. I've lived in this city all my life, raising my kids in this city. You always know that from time to time there are people who probably just don't get it. But you never think somehow in New York City and the suburbs of New York City that anybody would be vulnerable. What's happening here in New York is happening across the country. And it's time that we as members of Congress say, enough is enough. We are not going to stand for anti-Semitism. We're not going to stand, and we're here in the museum, of all places, talking about the Holocaust, commemorating what happened not that long ago. And I remember as a little boy growing up in the Bronx, and I was learning about the Holocaust, I thought, it couldn't happen here, could it? Couldn't happen here. You know what? It could happen here. And it could happen here if people of goodwill say nothing. It could happen here if people excuse it and say, well, you know, these people are mentally ill and therefore you've got to kind of, cut them a little slack. Absolutely not. People have a right to go in their homes. This was in somebody's home. People have a right to feel safe in their homes. People have a right to feel safe in their community. And I just want to pledge that we in the New York delegation, we're a tight-knit group, and we're going to continue to work together until the scourge of anti-Semitism and anti-anything is put to rest. As chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee, I want to tell you that I will also leave no stone unturned to make sure that perpetrators of such hate crimes are brought to justice, and that we teach our children and speak out forcefully that hate is not tolerated here. Not in New York City, not in the United States, not anywhere in the world. People of goodwill need to speak out, and the time is now. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd now like to bring up the esteemed chairwoman of the Oversight Committee of Manhattan, Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney.
Also of Queens and Brooklyn. I represent parts of all three boroughs. Good morning, and I first want to thank my extraordinary friend and leader, Max Rose, for pulling us all together, and all the extraordinary members of the New York delegation for coming, and all of you. And I particularly thank this extraordinary museum, which speaks to what we're talking about today, and that is hate. In this museum is an exhibit on Auschwitz. It's a symbol of what can happen if hate is allowed to grow and is not stopped. It's very, very serious and disturbing what is happening in our country now. The first responsibility of government is to keep our people safe in their homes, in their places of worship, in their schools, in the places where they work, and in the streets. That is the first responsibility of government. But we know now that we are facing in New York a historic low in crime, but a historic high in hate crimes, particularly anti-Semitic crimes. And just this past 2 weeks, there have been 13 different anti-Semitic attacks, including another violent attack just this morning. And then, of course, the terrible, gruesome stabbing in Monsey. It's a chilling reminder that our people are not safe and that we have to act. That was particularly disturbing. It was a Hanukkah celebration, a time of joy, yet it turned into an anti-Semitic attack. And hate crimes are undeniably on the rise across the country. The FBI reports that not only are hate crimes up, but particularly they're up in anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic attacks. Roughly 20% of the attacks, hate crimes, are of a religious nature, and well over half of them, according to their statistics, are anti-Semitic. So this important nonprofit security grant funding is incredibly important. It will allow houses of worship and cultural centers to invest in the security of their communities by hardening the facility with cameras and locks and others, but also by allowing them to hire contracted security personnel, which would allow them to provide more protection. And I am proud of the entire delegation working so hard to move it from $30 million to $90 million in this budget we just passed. And we will be able to help more communities. We also need to attack the root of the problem. And as a former teacher, I believe very much in education. And to combat hate and ignorance and bigotry, that we need to really start in our schools. And I have introduced, along with the entire delegation, a bill called it's called the Holocaust Education Bill, and it would have grants for teachers to get teaching supplies. It would be housed in the Holocaust Museum in this particular program in Washington, with a national database of lesson plans that are appropriate for each age, so that people can access it and bring it into the classroom to teach tolerance, anti-hate, and about the Holocaust. So we hope to pass that bill. We have over 300 co-sponsors now, which is an extraordinary number in Congress. It's a bill that needs to go to the floor and be passed. We also need to come together as a nation to stamp out this rising wave of hatred, because the freedom of religion that is enshrined in our Constitution requires us to ensure that all communities of faith can gather in their houses of worship without fear of harm. I join numerous religious leaders and Jewish leaders in this country that are calling upon the FBI to start a task force to combat the rising incidences of anti-Semitism in our country, to coordinate all of our attorney generals, all of our governors, all of our teachers, all of government in a strategy to combat this. New York is a great city, and we are a city of many faiths and many cultures. And an attack on any one of our communities is an attack on all of us. And this is needed, this bill. I congratulate us for bringing this forward, but it's the first step. But working together, I believe tomorrow will be a better day, a safer day, and a more tolerant and understanding and stronger country, working together to combat this now. Thank you.
It's now my honor to bring up Congressman Gregory Meeks, the chair of the Financial Services Subcommittee on Consumer Protections and Financial Institutions, as well as a member of the House Committee on Foreign Affairs.
Thank you, Congressman Rose. I wish I wasn't here today, because I wish that the symptoms of cancer that is taking place in our country didn't exist. I wish that we didn't have this sickness in our society. I had thought that when you look at this great experiment that we call America, that we have observed from our past, that we would do better, and that we would have been healed by now from the sickness of hate. That we would have learned by now that in this place that we call the United States of America, and in this city that is and has been an example of multiculturals, of multi-religions, and of acceptance, would not become part of the cancer that's now existing in our country. And it means that we've got to all come together to make sure that we do everything, leave no stone unturned, to get rid of this cancer that is eating at our society. When I think of what has taken place over the last few days, when I think of what has taken place around the world, it means more importantly today than ever that all of us who are human stand up and speak out and do and let everyone know that we will not tolerate anti-Semitism and hate in our country. It is a scenario where we must make sure, yes, we're going to educate, but also, as indicated, we're going to make sure that we're going to prosecute. We're going to make sure that we also do the kinds of things to make sure that those who would even think of such an act will know that the entire universe of humanity will come down after them. So it is important, for example, when there's a case of anti-Semitism, that is not just, it doesn't just affect the Jewish community. And I know how it does when you can't imagine that you could allow your child or someone just to walk down the street. But it doesn't just affect the Jewish community. And it's not just the Jewish community that needs to stand up and speak out. It is all of us, especially those of us who are not Jewish, to stand up and say, we will not allow this to continue in our city, in our state, in our nation, especially those of us who may have been victimized in the past in our culture here by racism. It is wrong. And generally you say you don't want to be angry, but yes, I'm angry. I'm angry because this should not take place against my brother and sister simply because of their Jewish faith, simply because of who they are. And unless we all get angry, then the message will not get through that we're going to stop this, and you are the cancer that we're going to cut out if you're filled with hate. Hate has no place here. We have got to stand up and make sure that we leave no stone unturned. Just as we would fight the horrendous disease of cancer, we're going to fight the horrendous disease of hatred and anti-Semitism. And so I say out there to my brothers and sisters of the Jewish faith, I'm going to lock arms with you. I'm going to walk with you. I'm going to talk with you. And I'm going to make sure that collectively together, those who perpetuate these anti-Semitic and hateful acts, until each and every one of them are gone. Because only then will we have succeeded in this great experiment that we call the United States of America and be an example for others all over the world. Because if we're not, if we're silent now, how can we lead? That's why my chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee sends a message out wherever he goes. And it's got to be a united message. Whether you're black, whether you're white, whether you're Jewish, whether you're Muslim, whether you're Christian, whether you're Asian or Hispanic, it's all of us. Because a threat of anti-Semitism and hatred anywhere is a threat everywhere. And together we can show that humankind can stand for goodness and rid ourselves of the evil of anti-Semitism and hatred.
Congressman, thank you. Next, I'd like to introduce Congresswoman Yvette Clarke, Vice Chair of the House Committee on Energy and Commerce and a member of the House Committee on Homeland Security. Congresswoman?
I have got to start by thanking Congressman Max Rose for his leadership and assembling us as a delegation here today. You know, I was born and raised in the Crown Heights, Flatbush section of Brooklyn. And throughout my life, my neighbors have been a diversity of individuals, not only from around the world, but of every faith. And I can recall just growing up in Brooklyn, the level of interactions that we had as neighbors in school and being taught about the virtues of tolerance. I think that we all owe it to one another to continue the tradition of interacting with our children in a way in which they understand and recognize the collective humanity that makes our community so rich, that makes New York City so very special. And I think that we have fallen short in that regard. That is one front line that we need to establish, because anti-Semitism and hatred cannot grow in our beloved city. After the initial pain and shock and outrage at the brazen and depraved indifference to life on display in all of these incidents, we must respond with a greater force that illuminates the need for all people of goodwill to stand together and to stop this violent behavior in its tracks. As a representative of the 9th District of New York, it is devastating to witness the rise of anti-Semitism, not only in my own community, but around the world. Especially, however, in the place that I call home. The community we love is in crisis because yet again, we have witnessed anti-Semitic hate crimes tear apart our neighborhood and Jewish communities across this nation. The time is now for us to act. Now more than ever, we must protect our Jewish brothers and sisters from the anti-Semitism and hate crimes that we have seen this rise. We must take drastic measures to ensure our community's sacred places of worship remain safe havens. I'm proud that we have nearly doubled our city's nonprofit security funding to a whopping $90 million. And that helps us to deal with this issue on the ground, because indeed, this is an issue we have to deal with at the granular level, in the communities in which we all live. We reiterate our commitment to protecting places of worship, standing up against hatred in all of its forms, especially anti-Semitism. A reminder for the Jewish community today is that we stand with you, stay strong, and we all must remain vigilant. I want to thank my colleagues for their commitment. I want to thank all of those people of goodwill in our communities who have stepped forward in this day and time, recognizing the peril that is before us. Because indeed, if we do not act and these behaviors continue to grow, if they go unchecked and unaddressed, we have a real problem in terms of what we would have to deal with this next generation. So I am committed. I think we are all committed. We want to make sure that these grants, as Max Rose has stated, get to the community-based organizations in Brooklyn and throughout the city, or throughout this state, so that we can make sure that we are applying ourselves to ending this scourge of hate and anti-Semitism. I thank you all once again.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Next, it's my privilege to introduce Congresswoman Grace Meng, member of the House Committee on Appropriations.
Good morning, everyone. I want to thank my colleague, Congressman Max Rose, for bringing us all together this morning. And I want to thank our caucus chairman, Hakeem Jeffries, for his leadership in our caucus as well. We come here today and we stand united as a delegation here in New York, and we come here as a delegation that is hurt. We stand here in the Jewish Museum Heritage, and we stand here in the harbor right next to the Statue of Liberty, and we stand here as diverse representatives of many, many communities who have come to this country, that first wave of immigrants in whichever countries that they first came from, to seek refuge in this great country because they knew that all were welcome here. And the spate of anti-Semitic hate crimes that our Jewish communities have endured over the last year has really threatened the foundation of our city, which thrives on religious freedom. But our Jewish leaders and families have not backed down or been scared away from their houses of worship. From Monsey to Williamsburg to Kew Garden Hills and Queens, Jewish communities have prayed and danced and honored their traditions, still in the face of danger. This nonprofit security grant program, and my colleague Max Rose is correct, thoughts and prayers are not enough, tweets are not sufficient. It's time to put money behind our words. And this nonprofit security grant program is an initiative that I've been talking about with my constituents, as all of my colleagues have been since I've been elected to Congress. As a member of the Appropriations Committee, we've been working tirelessly to increase funding every fiscal year for these grants, and more importantly, to expand awareness about them. We've been working with our chairwoman, Nita Lowy, who's not technically a member of the New York City delegation, but is a New York State member and is also chair of the entire House Appropriations Committee, as well as Chairman Jose Serrano, who is one of the chairmen of our subcommittees. And we've worked to secure, first in fiscal 2018, by doubling the funding from the year before to $50 million, and in this most recent fiscal year to increasing it to $90 million. And as we work together with the House, both Republicans and Democrats, unfortunately, Congresswoman and our chairwoman, Nita Lowy, even though she won't technically be there as appropriations chairwoman, we as a New York delegation need to continue to fight strong to make sure that our local institutions continue to get the funding that we so desperately need. This amount of funding is for synagogues, it's for mosques, it's for churches, and every month that we go around talking to our local nonprofit institutions, we still find more leaders who don't necessarily know about this pot of money. And as we've been increasing it in Congress, it's more important than ever that we continue to go around. And so if there are constituents, institutions, houses of worship who have not yet applied for this pot of funding, please do not hesitate to contact their congressional member, because we can be of a resource to make sure that they are getting these grants and that they are able to, this money is literally something that goes towards beefing up their physical security with enhancements such as barriers, gates, safety gear, surveillance equipment. These grants are vital, and if you talk to any institution that has had benefit from these grants before, they will tell you how important they have been in keeping their congregants safe. And New York City, as we all know, is the most high-risk security area in the country, and we're committed to continue to work to ensure that our region here in New York and the tri-state area has the resources that we need to protect our New York communities. Thank you so much for being here during a holiday week. Thank you for taking the time to report on this instrumental increase of funding that will literally go towards helping to protect and save the lives of our fellow New Yorkers.
I'd also like to acknowledge Congresswoman Nydia Velasquez's office, her tremendous leadership. Evelyn Cruz, her district director, is here representing Congresswoman Velasquez. And with that, I would like to, it's my honor to introduce and bring up Caucus Chairman Hakeem Jeffries, who has not only been an extraordinary leader and supporter of religious freedom here in New York City and New York State, was an extraordinary leader across the country. With that, Hakeem.
Thank you, Max. As we bring this to a close, I want to thank Congressman Rose for his tremendous leadership in convening us together and helping to lead the fight to increase the security grant assistance to a record level, along with all of the members of the New York delegation. You know, 75 years ago, the horrors of the Holocaust were first revealed to the world. 75 years ago, at the conclusion of World War II. And while we've come a long way in America and throughout the world, the events of the last few weeks and the rising tide of anti-Semitism reveal that we still have a long way to go. And it's not just that anti-Semitism continues to live in the soil of Europe, but we know that anti-Semitism continues to live in part of the soil of America. And we will stand together to make sure that we eradicate this cancer. Dr. King once said during the height of the civil rights movement that in the end, what we will remember is not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. That's why we, as a New York delegation representing every single one of the diverse communities of New York City, stand together to say, we will stamp out anti-Semitism, we will stamp out hatred, we will stamp out intolerance, no matter what it takes. We want to say to anybody who's contemplating an anti-Semitic act, cut it out. You will be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. You will be ostracized. You will be punished. You will be held accountable. Cut it out. Now, we've come together to talk about the $90 million that that is a record level of funding for not-for-profit institutions, and also to say to all of the religious and community-based religious institutions that we're going to work together with you, as Congressman Rose indicated, as a delegation to fight to make sure you can access this funding. We want to make sure that you can access it in Staten Island, the district that Max Rose represents. Access it in 5 towns, which Greg Meeks represents. Access it in Crown Heights and Midwood, that Yvette Clarke represents. On the Upper East Side, that Carolyn Maloney represents. In Forest Hills, that Grace Meng represents, and in Riverdale, and of course Muncie, that Eliot Engel represents, along with the Brighton Beach and Mill Basin and Seagate communities that I serve. We all stand today with the Jewish communities throughout our great city. I've got the honor, as an African American, to represent the 9th most African American district in the country and the 16th most Jewish. And there are folks in Washington who say, Hakeem, is that complicated? I say, no, it's the best of both worlds. It represents what New York City is all about. And with the leadership of Max Rose, we're here today to stand together to say we will denounce it,